Okay, well, thanks for the heads up about the sound, because that happens once in a while, and it always sucks when it does. But it was an easy fix. So welcome to this morning's live stream, another edition of Call and Response. I'll take questions and try to answer them about playing the changes on the blues. I got some questions already, which I'm going to start with because they were really good. But I will also take questions by chat. So if you've got them, fire them off. And you can post them while I'm talking or doing something else, talking or playing. It won't be super distracting, and then they'll be there waiting because there's kind of a delay between what I'm doing and what you're seeing. So so post when you can, or when the thought comes to you, and I'll address it when I can. And if we're getting near the end and excuse me, you haven't had your question answered yet, post it again, because sometimes stuff drifts up into the chat and I don't see it. So I'm going to start with this question from Roger. It was actually a couple of questions, and these sort of seem to go together. So I'm going to start with these. So he asked, what's the best way to internalize licks so they become part of your everyday playing? And how do you break out of relying on the minor pentatonic? So these two things I think really go together, because the idea of playing the changes is one of, it's really the yin and yang of, like, playing pentatonics. You don't really deal with too directly with the changes. We all learn to play blues by taking a scale, and I'm playing an F, so I'll play an F minor pentatonic, right? So and the thing that's so great about that is that you don't really need to think about the chords as they go by, right? You can just play this scale. And so you can focus on the phrasing and the attack and, all the things that give it the emotional content that you want it to have, which is why playing blues is so satisfying, because you're not having to think too much about what chord am I on, what note am I playing. And so, it leaves you free to really focus on the part that we all enjoy about music, which is the expression. And I think this is part of why playing the changes or trying to learn anything about jazz gets so frustrating, because it goes from being, if you start from a blues point of view or a blues rock point of view, which is kind of the same vocabulary at least,